Okay, so I think we are just about ready to kick things off. So before we get into the intros, firstly, if you have a question at all, please do submit it below and we will go through as many questions as possible at the end, if that's okay. And then secondly, I guess I'd really just like to thank everyone very much for joining us this morning. I certainly hope everyone is having a fantastic first week of December and feeling suitably festive. I know I very much am. And I suppose this week is officially the start of Christmas and the easing of lockdown restrictions in both Ireland and the UK. So you're all very welcome to our last Freenow hosted webinar of the year, which of course is ground transportation, adapting travel policies in a changing landscape. So what we're going to do is we'll share with you the findings of the latest European study conducted by the GBTA, so that's the Global Business Travel Association, on travel managers and business travellers, basically what they're feeling, thinking, seeing, doing around ground transportation right now. Admittedly, I actually had a couple of very brief moments of panic recently where I was wondering, will people be fed up with webinars at this point in the year? And the answer is apparently not, which is great, because it's obviously one of the things that's keeping us so connected outside of our own companies. And so I know on this version of Zoom, you can't actually see other participants as we're using Zoom webinar just to cater for the capacity, but I just wanted to share with you that you're kind of you're in great company, because we had over 250 registrants from the travel industry, from travel management, procurement, travel suppliers and more. So we're really just delighted to kind of have our travel community all here together today, just before the Christmas break. So without further ado, let me introduce the speakers. And today I'm actually double jobbing, as I'm part host, part speaker, but I'm Ailish O'Donnell, and as you'll see there, head of sales for Ireland. So basically just helping companies across Europe upgrade their ground transportation across corporate, government, hospitality. And then we have Jason Dunderdale, my counterpart as head of sales for the UK. So he is a business travel expert and enthusiast by all accounts, and leading our efforts in transforming ground transportation and modernising mobility all across the UK. And lastly, but by no means least, we are really delighted to have Scott Davies here with us. So CEO of ITM, Institute of Travel Management. So for anyone that might not be familiar, the ITM look to inform, connect, educate and inspire their members in a constantly changing market. And this year, more than any, I can honestly say they have really just absolutely gone above and beyond in doing just that, led by the extraordinary efforts of Scott and the brilliant ITM team. So welcome, Scott.
Thank you. Great intro.
No worries at all. So Scott, as I say, you are very welcome. And I guess it makes the most sense to start with the subject of the year, COVID-19. So what were the key findings from the study regarding the impact of coronavirus in relation to ground transportation for you?
Okay, so the study is based in two separate surveys, one of business travellers and one of corporate travel managers. There were also 15 in-depth interviews with travel managers addressing several key questions, including coronavirus response. So how have travel programs responded to the pandemic? Have travel managers had conversations with preferred ground transportation providers about sanitation practices? Are business travellers interested in allowing their company to track data about their ground transportation rides to aid contact tracing? Travel policies. How do corporate travel policies address ground transportation on work trips? And have policies changed as a result of the coronavirus? Travel preferences. Which modes of ground transportation do business travellers prefer to take on work trips? And have preferences changed as a result of the pandemic? And of course, ride-hailing apps. What do business travellers and travel managers view as the most important features of ride-hailing mobile apps? How often do travel programs in Europe have a formal relationship, contract or company account with a ride-hailing company? Today we'll be specifically looking at the coronavirus response, ride-hailing apps, sustainability and micro-mobility. So the coronavirus has certainly made companies rethink policies on ground transportation. Half of European travel managers say their company has changed its policies on ground transportation as a result of the pandemic. In addition, European travel managers say their company will be more likely to allow some modes of ground transportation and less likely to allow others. And you can see from the chart. Public transport is one of the transport methods that has been affected the most by the pandemic. 57% of travel managers say that they are less likely than before to allow their employees to use public transport. Concerns over crowding and the challenges of social distancing in such tight spaces are likely to be the key concerns for travel managers. The reluctance to use public transport is backed up by TfL analysis, with a 90% reduction in revenue reported during the pandemic. Some other changes might be more surprising. More than a quarter of travel programs are more likely to allow or encourage traditional taxis as a result of the pandemic. And this is higher than the proportion that are less likely to allow them. In all likelihood, some programs will encourage taxis in scenarios when they previously encouraged public transport. Surprisingly, some programs are less likely to allow car share at 41% and micro-mobility at 28% than they were before the pandemic. This is surprising because these modes of transportation promote social distancing, allowing employees to travel alone and avoid interacting with a driver. The car rental sector can also positively look at the future, with 37% of travel managers more likely than before to promote them as a travel option. However, with an increased focus on car rental and PHV or taxi options, one area that travel managers should be careful of is their sustainability goals. Where possible, they should look to use suppliers that can offer electric or at least zero emissions capable options, so as not to go backwards or fall behind on their CSR goals. Ground transportation companies have responded energetically to the coronavirus pandemic. They've introduced new safety measures such as mask requirements, enhanced cleaning, and in-vehicle partition screens. And whilst these measures are critical, a key goal of the study was to explore how travel programs also need to respond to the pandemic. Travel managers are, of course, interested in coronavirus-related safety measures. In the current COVID-19 environment, a large majority of travel managers are interested in using preferred ground transportation providers that they've vetted to ensure they meet safety and sanitation standards. Tracking data about ground transportation rides, such as destinations and driver names, to aid contract tracing is, of course, also important. However, fewer are interested in allowing travellers to use micro-mobility services, such as bicycles or electric scooters for rent on short trips. Having a strong formal relationship and becoming a preferred supplier is key, especially during COVID, and of course, relationships build trust. There are a variety of reasons why travel programs have formal agreements with vendors. Formal agreements can help companies save money, streamline processes like payment and invoicing, and receive detailed reporting. However, the coronavirus has underscored another key benefit. A formal relationship can foster communication and trust, allowing travel programs to vet the safety practices of their vendors. It's not surprising then that in the current environment, almost 9 out of 10 travel managers are only using preferred ground transportation providers that they vetted to ensure they meet safety and sanitation standards. We can also see from the study that it's not only travel managers who are interested in coronavirus-related safety measures. Business travellers are also very interested in these same initiatives. If they were to take a work trip currently, most travellers would be interested in using preferred providers that their company has vetted to ensure they meet standards and allow their company to track data to aid contact tracing and notifying others about possible exposure to COVID-19. Travel managers are also interested in these same measures. However, there's one key difference when comparing business travellers and travel managers. While only around a quarter of travel managers are currently interested in allowing travellers to use micro-mobility services, more than half of business travellers are interested in using these services in the current environment. Ailish.
Thank you, Scott. Some really interesting points there. And just for everyone viewing, there is a lot of data in the slides. So just to reiterate as well, everyone will get a copy of the white paper as well. So don't panic, if you wanted to kind of look at any of the percentages and things like that for maybe Ireland or the UK or both, because I know pre-corona, fun fact that the Dublin-London route as an airline route is actually one of the busiest in the world, bigger than any other country. So just a little fun fact there. So I know there will be lots of travellers going between Ireland and UK, so you probably want to delve into the stats a little bit more. So don't worry, you will get the white paper afterwards. But as I say, some really interesting points there. So thank you, Scott. And I mean, pre-corona, it was frequently an uphill battle for many travel managers to get business travelers to even adhere to preferred providers. So it is good to see now that travelers are kind of maybe wanting to shift a little and lean more into preferred providers for those safety benefits, which is great. But one point that I'll expand on myself is just on micromobility and sustainability. So if we look at sustainability there, it actually came in as the biggest pain point for travel managers right now. And interestingly enough, despite it being a massive, massive pressing topic at the moment, it still remains a challenge for the travel program, more so than other areas surveyed. So you'll see there, just at the bottom, it was flagged at 46% put it in one of their top 3 pain points. But as Scott mentioned just earlier, coronavirus really does have the potential to disrupt sustainable change when it does come to ground transportation, be it rail or micromobility, private taxi hire, regular taxi, like anything ground transportation. It is a viable option, but coronavirus is kind of affecting that as well. So what now? What do we do next, I suppose? So we know change needs to happen when it comes to corporate travel, but how do we shift mindsets, and how can we take action in travel management and as a traveler as well? So actually, I don't know if anyone saw the Metronome's digital clock in New York in September. They actually changed to count down the critical window that we have left before the effects of climate change become irreversible, which is actually only 7 years apparently. But from a travel program perspective, it's just important to find alternatives to just alternative ways basically to promote sustainability. So build it, building gamification or positive reinforcement of hybrid, electric, environmentally kinder choices. Like we can basically encourage people to rent compact cars, or maybe use a ride hailing app, or to use a bike, or just an option that will allow people to, request electric vehicles, as opposed to just kind of jumping into one off the street. So once we kind of maybe allow employees to use services such as bikes, e-bikes, electric scooters, there really is potential there, which I'll actually expand on a little bit in the next slide. So more data. So in Europe, corporate travel policies address some modes of ground transportation, but not others, as we see here. So prior to the pandemic, travel policies commonly covered taxis, car rentals, long distance trains, public transit, all there at 90% and above, as you can see. However, fewer policies address micromobility services such as rentable bikes, coming in there only 46%, or electric scooters at 45%. And I suppose there's probably millions of reasons why, but I suppose maybe the top reasons could be that it's just a recent trend. So electric scooters in particular have recently exploded in popularity around the world. I think many companies, they might update their travel policies on a fixed schedule. So maybe every 2 years or every 3 years, and not necessarily on an ongoing basis where they're chopping and changing all the time. So I think maybe in that regard, maybe people just haven't had a chance to include micromobility in their policies yet, but it's something that's being considered and that will happen. And then secondly is probably traveler interest. So in interviews, some travel managers did predict that their employees wouldn't actually want to use bikes or scooters for work trips, but the survey that was conducted by the GBTA did suggest otherwise. So while there's still a way to go with European traveller interest, a significant percentage, ranging up to, I think it was up to 57%, 57%, depending on which market you're in, we're interested in using bikes or electric scooters on business trips. But I think the more it's encouraged, the more it's integrated, the more it's used, traveller interest will just inevitably grow. And then I guess the third reason that I'll mention, just around micromobility in travel policies, would maybe be around liability concerns, which is a completely valid concern. And I think micromobility can raise concerns about safety and things like that, which have to be considered, of course, but those concerns are ever present when traveling for business, even down to the simple thing of crossing the street in a different city. But I mean, resisting change in this area won't actually solve that problem, but the more it's integrated, the more it's addressed in travel policies, the more this will improve the overall scope of introducing it, and maybe even the introduction of better insurance options and the likes. But I'll just, if we go to the next slide there, just even despite them not being necessarily addressed fully in formal travel policies in both Ireland and the UK, bikes and e-scooters are actively moving up the priority list for travellers. More so post-coronavirus, but they're definitely moving in the right direction. So the number of electric scooters for rent has really exploded. It has been the last 3 years, but I feel like just the last year, I've just seen them absolutely everywhere, like before coronavirus, obviously. Haven't been out too much lately. But in Europe, some business travellers are interested in using bikes and scooters on work trip, but fewer than half of corporate travel policies in these countries even address it. So like this by its very nature can actually just create some confusion when travellers want to use these services. I mean, in Ireland, for example, which is where I am based, legislation around scooters is changing soon. So e-scooter laws are about to change imminently. They're currently illegal, going to be moving to legal. And it's just important to be ready. And even no matter what market you're in or what market you're looking after, it is just important to kind of be ready, because it is a really viable option and for sustainability. And I suppose as a multimodal provider ourselves, we are also getting ready for this. But another area actually that also struggles with travel policy adherence and undocumentation in a different regard is ride hailing. So I think it's often referred to as the first and last mile, but you know, realistically sometimes the forgotten mile as well. So Jason, I know this area is one that you're very passionate about, so I'll actually pass over to you if you can run us through what were the standout findings from the study just around ride hailing and PHV, if you want to go ahead there.
Thank you very much, Ailish, and thank you for the introduction as well. I don't think I've ever been described as an expert in travel, but I'll certainly try and impart some knowledge today. So as Ailish said, I'm going to talk about ride hailing. And for those of you who've heard the term bandied around before, but are still unsure really what ride hailing is, essentially it just means having the ability to get a taxi, like a black cab in London, for example, or a PHV, which is a private hire vehicle, within a couple of minutes, typically using an app-based platform. So for this paper, business travellers were asked what modes of ground transportation were of interest when travelling for business. And as you can see, the top two, rail and rental, are both very established modes that in the main have been around for many years. Rail is probably the most cost-effective and sustainable mode for longer intercity journeys, and rental seeing a resurgence with simplified processes and more sustainable vehicles and the ability to travel within your own bubble with the recent pandemic. But what they both have in common is that they've long been adopted into travel policies. You can see the taxis and PHV came a close third and fourth. I found it really interesting that taxi and PHV were as high as they were. The UK, so UK corporates actually have the lowest taxi and PHV adoption, policy adoption across Europe at less than 50%. Yet UK and London specifically has the largest ride-hail market globally at over 6.8 billion, which is absolutely huge. So whilst reflecting on this, I started to wonder why the UK in particular has such a low policy adoption for taxi and PHV. I mean, we look at it and, ride-hailing has been around in the form of an app for 10 years in the market now. First app was released in 2010. And to me, 2010 feels like yesterday. And it just shows how fast-paced our environment has become. So I look back at my own business travel in 2019, and I look specifically on PHV. The reason why? Well, I just didn't want to go through and fish out a ton of old taxi receipts. But when I looked at my PHV usage last year, I actually taken over 200 trips. So that works out to 5 trips a week just about. And believe me, I wasn't traveling for work 5 days a week. But when I was typically taking 2 to 3 PHV trips on the days that I traveled. And that would typically look like, from home to the airports, from the airport to meetings. And for those of you who I've had meetings with, usually I'm armed with a box of donuts from, popular suppliers. And then typically after that, from the meeting to the hotel or to another meeting. I don't consider myself as the typical road warrior, merely just a frequent traveler. And I think what the study shows is, I'm not alone. Coincidentally, the study shows that nearly 70% of business travelers use ride-hailing apps for their business and personal life in equal measure. And I'm sure that with the audience today, the percentage is probably higher. The reality is that ride-hailing is only getting more popular. Ride-hailing has an estimated global market size of 218 billion by 2025. That's 218 billion. And that's even with the impact of COVID-19. Yet we still don't have it in most travel policies. But I think it's fair to say that, ride-hailing landscape is definitely a tricky one. And in my experience, it actually draws some parallels to car rental. And if you're looking to put it into your policy, I think a similar approach can be taken when adapting the policy to include it. One aspect that can't be ignored, though, is that to get the best user experience, using an app is absolutely key. As a consumer, we're so used to apps now, and we've seen more and more reliance on app-based travel. In fact, regardless of your transportation mode, business travelers regularly use mobile apps on both business trips and personal lives, whether it's getting your boarding pass from your airline, having your e-ticket for your trains, or whether it be micromobility or the all-encompassing TMC itinerary app. But why do we use apps at such a ferocious rate? Well, I mean, we just value the convenience and the ease that comes with using an app, and business travel is no different. In fact, when ordering a traditional taxi on business trips, travelers largely prefer using an app, rather than asking the hotel, the company, or their TMC to arrange the ride. It's just not feasible to add more and more layers in when you're looking to get a taxi or a PHV within a couple of minutes. More and more travelers, are saying that they're using traditional taxis or PHVs on business trips, which really just demonstrates an opportunity for, alternate providers of ground transportation. So, like ride-hailing technology companies, they're coming into the market even more so now to increase their market share within the business travel community. So on to the next slide, and we can see here what did travel managers tell us about app-based travel and the features that they value the most. Well, the great news is, as we find often, travel managers and business travel managers and business travelers value similar features to ride-hailing apps. And I love that travel managers have the finger on the pulse here. There's several key points that do stand out when analysing the preferences. Firstly, travel managers care about the trip experience for their employees. With ease of booking, cost, and short waiting times being the top three most important features. Two of the features, easy to book and short wait times, deal primarily with the trip experience. And travel managers are saying that these are more important than other key features, such as automated billing and quality of data, which actually are there to make their own lives easier. So in other words, they're not only looking for a product that meets their own needs, but also that meets the traveler's needs first. Secondly, both groups value automated billing and invoicing. Automated billing and invoicing is a key feature, and over 75% of European travel managers and business travelers look for this feature with any type of app-based travel. So we'll look for a ride-hailing partner that can simplify your billing. Today, travelers, they don't need to pay with their own money, and they certainly don't need to request reimbursement from the company. Believe me, I manually input nearly all 200 of those rides I took last year, and it's time that I just wish that I had back. A ride-hailing provider can automatically bill or invoice the traveler's company for rides taken through the app. This can help the traveler and the company to save time. The traveler spends less time filling out expense reports, and the company spends less time reviewing expense claims and reimbursing travelers. It also gives you visibility on a spend, which at the moment is out of policy and just is unmanaged. And lastly, policy enforcement. It's a key feature that a lot of travelers are now saying that they want to have. So very few travelers, and I know that you'll all have one or two that sit within your company, but very few work on the basis of asking for forgiveness rather than permission. This is why travelers say that the policy enforcement is one of the most important features, specifically for ride-hailing apps. In the UK and Ireland, more than a third of travelers include policy enforcement as one of the most important features. They want to follow the rules that the company puts in place for them. And in most cases, they might not know what the rules are. How many of our employees know that with the company allow them to use micromobility like e-scooters? When they've been out and they've had dinner and they want to just quickly get home without a taxi, some people use them. I know that I use them when I go, and I love using them. I think they're great. But also, does your policy allow to use PHVs, or is it just taxis? Are you allowed to take trips after work hours? These are things that people that they want to know. So my final bit of advice really, when you're looking for to partner with a ride hailing company on a formal basis, look for one that can configure their app automatically, to automatically apply the policies, so there can be little room for interpretation. Travelers want to know what they're able to do, and really, for me, it's we just need to start managing that unmanaged spend.
Thanks, Jason. No, that was great. Some really great insights there. And I think that actually ties us nicely into our concluding key takeaways just from the study. If you want to actually keep going and add your final comments there, because ride hailing was obviously arguably one of the top pieces of data that came from the study.
Yeah, thank you, Ailish. I think it's quite clear to see that ride hailing is growing in popularity, and business travelers they want it in policies, and they want the ability to use it. They're naturally using the ride hailing apps already, so adding them formally into a travel program, the adoption is going to be pretty easy, because most people are keen to use them and are comfortable in using them as well. And it also allows travel managers to regain control of unconsolidated spend. So travel programs, they should be encouraging this type of practice, and helping to ensure that they are managing the spend, and also that they're keeping all the travelers satisfied and happy.
Great, thanks, Jason. And Scott, do you want to share your Scott, do you want to go ahead and share your closing comments on the study?
Sure. So point 2 really is around the way coronavirus is changing traveller choices and ground transportation policies to emphasise safety and sanitation. And I think the partners who provide the health and safety information expected by travel managers and travellers are going to have the advantage. So both travellers and travel managers are aligned on how important duty of care and safety are. So suppliers that go the extra mile in this regard are best placed to become the preferred suppliers.
Thanks, Scott. And then, just the fourth and fifth pieces are again just tying into mobility and sustainability. So I suppose micromobility, not necessarily that it isn't on travel managers' radar, it is on the radar, but it is just answering the question around liability, viability, maybe alleged lack of interest versus actual interest from business travelers. But I suppose, however, even if it is of interest to a significant number of business travelers, it's just how can we manage that? How can we do that in the best way? And then on the sustainability side, I mean, it is a key priority for most European travel programs and business travelers, but it does present challenges. So while it's important to look internally, you should also just look outside your own business, I guess. So sustainability is also a key priority for consumers, and really is starting to inform their buying decisions. So just, I guess, communication is just going to be key, talking internally, talking to other companies externally, just even in talking to suppliers and things like that without commitment, just collecting information and things like that will be so key at this time. But I guess that kind of sums it up. I mean, the webinar was never to, present every single question that was asked in the study, as the white paper will be circulated afterwards. But we just wanted to pick out some key highlights that came from the white paper. But some really interesting highlights there throughout across the board. So what we might do now, as we have a little bit of time, is just have a look and take some questions if there are any, which there are, which is great. Okay, so the first question here is just taking into account everything we have learned so far this year, what do you think will be the biggest challenge for travel managers in 2021 right now? Scott, I don't know, Scott, would you like to take that one?
Of course, yeah, and it's the question that's often asked of us at ITM. You know, what are travellers' priorities going forward? And in the period we find ourselves in now, obviously things are very different. I would say the biggest challenge for travel managers today is the sheer uncertainty of the year ahead of us, and the fact that in reality no one's an expert anymore, or very few, maybe only Jason. But you know, we're heading into a period where everything's going to be different. No one quite knows how different. And things aren't going to get back to exactly how they were. Of course, sadly, we've lost so many people and so many skills and so much experience in the industry through furlough and displacement as well. As we go through next year, travel managers are concerned that there'll be a lot of retraining and adjusting that's needed for everyone to help build programs back together again. Clearly, the world has changed partly forever, and building those programs back is going to be a big challenge. The one thing I would, of course, say is that the ITM, we survey our buyers once a year around this time about exactly what their priorities are in detail for the coming year. And of course, you can hear about that next Tuesday at our trending summit. One of the keys, Ailish, is that you know, year after year, travel managers have placed duty of care and safety as the top priority. So we'll be revealing next week whether that's still the case.
Great. No, we're all very much looking forward to that here as well. But no, like, I mean, spot on. I think we actually have another question that kind of is a nice follow on to that again, because it's around health and safety too. So do you think electric scooters would stand against corporate health and safety requirements? I believe it could be more dangerous for them to travel than taking a cab or a bike. Cool. I might just start off on this one, because of course it is naturally a safety concern, and it is something new, and it's not necessarily to say that people just need to, you know, encourage their staff to go taking scooters and things like that. It'll be very much, you know, it's just kind of controlling an option that exists. So as I said, like, I think a lot of markets across Europe, in some countries it is there is legislation for scooters, and then in some there isn't yet. And when you have a situation where there's no legislation or no control or no management, be it, you know, via the country's government or via like a travel management program, like when things aren't controlled and measured and managed, that's when there's kind of more risk exposed. But I think the more that it's integrated, the more that it's spoken about, the more options will become available and things like that. So like Scott just kind of said there, like no one is an expert anymore, no one knows what the future will hold, but maybe, you know, in a year's time and things like that, that companies will provide their staff with, you know, appropriate like gear, like things like helmets and stuff like that, if they do want to hop on a bicycle or an electric bike or an electric scooter, and things like that. But I think, you know, maybe someone cycling on company time, you know, there is a danger with that and there is risks. Someone on a scooter, arguably, yes, like it does have a small kind of motorized engine on the back. So I think like when there's things like speed limits and proper lanes that are, you know, built for scooters and things like that, but it is just like a cyclical process. So the more, you know, the more there's interest, I suppose, and, you know, countries and governments are really starting to realize that there is demand, and, you know, there's people using them privately anyway, that we just need to have the proper structures, the proper insurances, the proper mechanics, and just kind of think about it. But it's better to address it than to just kind of let it happen and just be like, oh well, you know, they're dangerous, so we won't address it, that kind of thing. But I know the International Transport Forum actually did a study on this just before coronavirus, where they actually made like a number of recommendations just around basically kind of having separate infrastructure and, you know, restricting the use of scooters on pavements, for example, because that, you know, can endanger the user and pedestrians, lowering the speed limit, and, you know, just having kind of the appropriate lanes and things like that, which become, you know, it will gradually become a safer option. But again, just because it's such a sustainable option and so efficient, we just have to kind of look to the future and how we can all integrate it, you know, as well as the job and the piece of work that government and cities have to do as well. Cool. So, sorry, Jason, do you want to add anything at all to that, or?
I think that was very comprehensive, Ailish. I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. There has to be some framework and some policies put in place to allow people to use it. But, you know, to my point that we are in such a fast-paced environment at the moment, and things are changing, and they're certainly becoming more and more popular. So whilst I agree that they can be a lot more dangerous than your typical modes of transport, it is something that probably at some stage will need to be adopted, and I think we all need to be on the front foot with it.
And I think, Eilish, I would just add as well that a little bit like the emergence of ride-hailing apps, in the last decade, whether travel buyers would like them to be out of policy or not, travelers are going to use them. So, it's something that's you're going to have to try and accommodate somehow.
Absolutely. No, fully agree. Okay, so I know we are over 30 minutes now. So what we might do is we will wrap this up. I think, as I mentioned before, it was just a snapshot insight into some of the key takeaways. We'll share the white paper, so please do encourage to have a read and obviously share it internally within your companies to whoever you think might be interested in the findings and the data. And yeah, I think we can leave it there. So thank you very much again to Jason and of course Scott for joining us this morning. We hope everyone found some of the content useful, and yeah, have a great week and a wonderful lead into Christmas, and we'll talk to everyone soon. Cool, take care, bye.
Thanks, Scott. Bye.
Thank you, bye-bye.